Julie and Gretchen here. Thank you for joining us on Live with Love on a Tuesday. So, Julie, there's been a lot of conversation, obviously, over the last week about free speech, which I thought was interesting because it kind of plays into what we talk about a lot at Lift Our Voices, which is all about transparency and being able to own your own voice and have free speech about what happens to you in the workplace. And I just thought it was interesting on the heels of the Jimmy Kimmel situation, how interesting it is that free speech actually benefits everyone, right? Free speech is not something that should be, I think, a political discussion by any stretch of the imagination. And it's interesting to note that back in the 80s, it was actually the Republicans and President Reagan who wanted to expand free speech, and they limited the fairness doctrine, and that's how we ended up with Rush Limbaugh in the afternoons on talk radio.
Yeah, and it extends beyond that, because I remember when the Biden administration wanted to create this panel within Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security, to effectively, it was a disinformation panel, to effectively fight disinformation on social media, because there was so much disinformation. And they put a woman in charge of it named Nina Jankowicz, who I happen to know, who was a Russia expert. And there was a reason for why they put her in there, because it was the Russian bots who were spreading all this disinformation on Twitter and other social media. And Republicans made a really big deal out of it. And to be honest, like, I kind of understood why, even though I understood why the Biden administration was doing this, but they were basically saying, what one person's disinformation is another person's information. And who are we to police what people are saying on social media and call it disinformation? Again, I understood what the Biden administration was doing, but I also understood where the Republicans were coming from on this. And what is so interesting to me is that that's not where we are now in a lot of quarters. And I don't think this is a partisan issue necessarily, because I know that there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that want to police symbols or police speech that they don't agree with or they don't like, and that they consider to be hate speech. And I don't agree with that at all. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. I think you should be able to say whatever you want, whenever you want. For our purposes, why this is so important is because we fight all day long to make sure that people can tell their stories. And what one person's proprietary information is when it comes to toxic workplace behavior is another person's personal story. And that's why it's so important to be very, very absolutist about this. If you have something that you want to talk about that is an experience endemic to you, that is not infringing on somebody's right to make a living, like you're not giving out the secret formula to Coca-Cola. But if it's something endemic to you, like something really bad happened to you, you should be able to talk about it. That's it. No other discussions about it. I don't even understand why we're having debates as to what you can say and when you can say it and how you can say it and why you can't say it. It's your life. It's your story. You should be able to talk about it.
Yeah. And it hit me in the middle of the night last night that it's the same argument as we're having in the general public right now. I mean, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different as far as, but kind of not really, because once you start clamping down on free speech in the media and what people can say or not say, that starts to filter down more, right? Because it becomes part of society, it becomes part of the cultural norms, it becomes, executive orders or laws or whatever it might be. And before you know it, all the work that we're trying to do to open that up is then even clamped down on more. And so it really is, it's why everyone should have the balls, like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, and I guess Mitch McConnell yesterday, finally got into it, saying that we should not limit free speech. I mean, the argument right now just happens to be against democratic point of views. But, the other interesting point, Julie, is that for so long they've been saying that the mainstream media skewed slightly to the left, but really the mass media right now and how we've changed it with the influencers on podcasters and talk radio. I mean, the majority of that, you could argue, is what got Trump reelected the second time. And so it's really almost skewed to the other side.
And look what's happening right now. It looks like Larry Ellison and potentially Rupert Murdoch are going to acquire TikTok in the United States. I've always said the number one cable news station, the number one cable station, period, not even news, is Fox News, is skewed to the right. The number one talk radio, the 1 through 10, predominantly skewed to the right. The number one newspaper that is published is the Wall Street Journal, skews to the right. And so over and over and over again, what you're seeing is that the mainstream media actually is now right, which is fine. I mean, it's great. But the problem that I find is that when you start infringing on people's right to speak, you're setting up a phenomenon where it becomes a tit for tat. Because one day we will have a Democrat in charge of the FCC. And imagine if that Democrat told the chairman of the FCC to go to Rupert Murdoch and say, or to Lachlan Murdoch and to say, hey, if you want some sort of merger to happen, if you want to continue to acquire, which they always do, acquire more things, you might, tell Gutfeld, I don't like his jokes. Get rid of him on the 5, get rid of him on his show. Don't want him anymore. That's the kind of stuff that is very dangerous. It is incredibly dangerous. And for our purposes and for what we do, it's incredibly dangerous because we desperately fight to make sure that people have their voice at work. And when you say, well, Gretchen, I don't want you talking about what happened to you. But Julie, maybe you could talk about what happened to you because what happened to you is maybe not as bad as what happened to Gretchen. You're setting up these weirdo systems that preclude people from telling their stories, and the ramifications are brutal. And speaking of free speech, again, I keep coming back to this. What is more freeing than to be able to tell your own story, especially if it's something that's really important to you and oftentimes very traumatic that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I heard an interesting argument yesterday, actually from the left, which was that they were advocating for the fact that Democrats should be standing up right now and actually say, instead of waiting for when they're in power so that they can take away Fox News and talk radio and podcasters and all that, to actually stand up right now and say what we should be arguing is to limit the power of the FCC jointly. That both parties should come together and limit now the power of the SEC so that this can't happen no matter who is in power. And that would be a smarter argument than, because can you imagine a world where for these 4 years, if Trump were to continue down this path of getting rid of people and free speech, and then if we actually have elections in 3 years and then a Democrat would win and then they would just completely turn it back around. I mean, for our country, it would be it might be like retribution, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, but it would be horrible for our country.
Horrible, and a slippery slope. And I know that there are a lot of Democrats out there that are just so enraged about what's happening that they're like, really, if this is how you want to play it, well, we can play it both ways. I like the approach of limiting the FCC better. Right? Because it's not going to happen, unfortunately, right now, because Trump won't allow it, I don't think. But the truth of the matter is the FCC existed to police the public airwaves at a time when you had 3 stations and they were ABC, NBC, and CBS. And they were supposed to act in the public interest. But the public interest has now been defined, at least by this administration, as something that it's never been defined as before. It's been defined as whatever is in the interest of a particular viewpoint. That is a deeply dangerous slope to go down. And again, what I don't understand and have never understood about taking away free speech on college campuses, taking away free speech with Jimmy Kimmel, taking away free speech, in workplaces, is the shoe is always, it's a round world and the shoe is always in the other foot. And when you tell Columbia that they have to, or Berkeley, that they have to submit a list of professors that you don't disagree with, that somehow have a particular viewpoint that this administration doesn't agree with, and sometimes I don't agree with. the next time there's a Democratic president, if this is how this is going to go, you're going to tell some conservative college like Hillsdale or somebody like that, wait a second, we don't like what you're teaching and we're going to take that away from you.
Yeah.
And
or Liberty or any of
Liberty or any of these universities, we don't like that. We don't like that you discriminate against, LGBTQ kids, so that we're going to take away your federal funding. And from my perspective, you should be able to teach what you want. You should be able to say what you want, even if I don't agree with it. And a lot of the speech that I heard at Columbia campus, I don't agree with, but they should be able to say it. And you know what you do? You vote with the power of the purse. Like, if I don't like it, I'm not going to go and take those classes, or I'm not going to go to those universities. Or I'm not going to listen to Jimmy Kimmel. I'll turn him off and I'll watch Family Feud reruns instead. But why are you preventing people from accessing this stuff when, in fact, it should be like, again, if you're a capitalist, the marketplace should determine that, not the government. That's what I understand.
And now, just not to stay too much on Kimmel, but it'll be interesting to see what he says tonight, because I'm wondering what the future holds now after that threat happened last week. And now the Sinclair stations are not going to still air Kimmel, and they sway definitely to the right. So that's a whole nother thing. But let's take a look at a question.
Let me say this about Sinclair before we take the question, because I do want to make this point. Sinclair is very conservative. The ownership is conservative. They also operate in places that are conservative. What I think Sinclair is missing is that people are cutting the cord. And if I lived in a Sinclair, if my ABC were distributed by Sinclair and I wanted to watch Kimmel tonight instead of reruns of Family Feud, which is what I think they're putting up there, or maybe a tribute to Charlie Kirk, I would just go online. I would go to YouTube, or I would go to the ABC stream, and I would just watch it there. And that's, it's going to lead to people cutting the cord. And
I think they said they're going to put up news programming now that I read last night. I don't even know what that would be.
Fine.
But interestingly enough, they put the Charlie Kirk dedication they were going to put on their stations on YouTube instead of on their stations, which is a whole nother discussion. But this is the problem we get into when we, go too far to the right or too far to the left, which is why I've always tried to be down the center. Even though if you look at my Twitter, people are actually saying that because I'm for free speech, I'm not a Christian anymore. What?
Wait, what?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. I thought you were a Christian person, and based on your arguments of down the middle for free speech, you're not a Christian anymore. This is how far we've come to where, look, you and I are both used to being attacked on social media for a million reasons, including coming forward at Fox. But this is how we are. We're in these silos. Like, now you can't be for free speech, which we've just pointed out. Both parties have argued for. It's why we separated from Great Britain, 250 years ago. Now I'm being told I can't be a Christian because I'm for free speech.
What does that have to, I have to say, like, again, just because you support free speech doesn't mean you agree with that speech, right? And if it's anti-Christian speech that you don't agree with, you don't have to participate. In other words, you can change the channel.
But free speech, and whether or not I agree with Kimmel or not, has nothing to do with my religion.
That is offense. That's just
no. Actually, I just tweeted back. So wait a minute. Christians can't be in the middle. I mean, this is so crazy. Casual Observer writes, religion entwined with politics is an old Southern thing gone mainstream. Yeah, much more so recently. Yeah. Hey, Em, can you throw that question back up from my Instagram live that we had there? Okay, now I have to use my laser vision to read it. Both of you have lived through being silenced in the workplace. What has that journey taught you about resilience, and how can others in politics or workplace find courage to share the truth? Yeah. Well, we just said we have tough skin from just looking at our social media, and certainly from coming forward at Fox News during a time that predated the Me Too movement, where I felt completely alone in doing what I did. And I know, Julie, the whole point of being silenced, the whole point of why companies silence you is because they want you to feel alone. Not only can you not tell other people what's happening to you, because then there would be sort of a class action situation potentially, right? But so it precludes you from banding together. but it also makes you feel completely isolated, and you start questioning yourself. You start being like, well, maybe it's not that bad, or maybe I'm just making this up in my mind, or maybe, you know, kind of the psychological torture of being silenced, which is something, by the way, Julie, that you and I are talking about trying to study more, because nobody's ever studied the mental side English of being silenced.
It's so funny that this question came up because we were just talking about this on our call right before we came on the show. And look, I'm going to be honest. It sucks. It is awful. And it is something that I think you don't anticipate being as awful as it is. But in terms of sharing the truth, I would say look at your own circumstances. We don't tell people that they have to come forward, just blanket come forward, because everybody's got their own story. I came forward and was able to get out of my NDA with a politician, with Governor Murphy of New Jersey, after years of having being threatened legally and professionally, and on the other hand, having legislators, especially female legislators, put a lot of pressure on him to release me from my NDA. The state's largest newspaper ran editorial after editorial after editorial demanding that I be released from my NDA. So, you know, you find support where you can, but don't forget that's also a pretty high profile example. Most people don't have legislators and most people don't have newspapers coming to their aid on this stuff. It is deeply isolating, as Gretchen pointed out. It is deeply depressing in that you have had something really bad happen to you, but you can't talk to anybody about it, which is, of course, making you stay up at night ruminating about how you ended up in this place in the first place. And most of the time you did, you know, not most of the time, I would say 99.9% of the time, you did nothing wrong. Most people who find themselves in this situation did nothing wrong. They just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time with a piece of paper saying they can't speak out. So, you know, you find courage where you can. For me, and Gretchen, I think you experienced the same thing at Fox. I was just so angry. I was just so furious that somebody did this to my career. And I know you felt exactly the same way, that I had worked my butt off to make this guy, Governor Murphy, you know, I'd gotten him elected. I'd given up my life effectively in service of his political career. Gretchen, I know you gave up your life in service of Fox News for many years to make your show the best it could be. You carried a morning show that was the #1 morning show, I think, certainly on cable, but sometimes it beat the networks, I believe. And then you carried your own show in the afternoons. And after all of that, both of us felt that we had just been completely shunted to the side. And some people get depressed and some people get angry. And both of us got really angry. Depressed too, but also very angry. And that's how you get the courage. You just say, I mean, I'm going to curse now, but you just say, fuck it. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. And I think that's very specific to your circumstances. And I don't want to say that that's a one size fits all approach, because it's not.
No. Yeah, I mean, I sort of felt at that point, because they fired me and took away the career I'd killed myself for after 30 years. And so I often say that if I didn't do it, who was going to do it? And I'm not sure anyone else was going to do it. So anyway, it is a personal decision, because unfortunately in our society, we still may be penalized when we open our mouth and come forward. That's why we're trying to do so much change at Lift Our Voices, and why we believe in passing bipartisan laws is the first step to actually corporate change, right? Because now companies have to follow these new rules, and that will help to evolve culture as well. But there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. All right, LinkedIn, there's a question. In a polarized world, where even workplaces push people into silence, what ripple effects do you see when the truth gets buried? Well, that's a loaded question. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, we've all learned that the only way we fix these issues is to talk openly about them, right? And that's just not workplace misconduct. That's anything in life. Like I was lucky enough to grow up in a family where we talked at dinner time. We always had a family dinner. We always talked about things. And that's how you solve things. It's kind of a crisis in our society right now, I think, in general, with social media and phones taking over kids' lives instead of actually having conversations with people. But especially in your families and in the workplace, it's just so important to be able to have that transparency. Luckily, I think our younger generations, as odd as it may be, because they're so siloed in their phones, they actually want more transparency at work, right? They're fighting for that transparency, and that's where we see the hope in the work that we do at Lift Our Voices, to untangle these silencing mechanisms. We see hope in the younger people to push for that as they go forward in the workplace.
Yeah, I gotta say to that point, young kids are not putting up with this. Gen Z, when they go into the workplace, they're not putting up with this the way that at least our generation X kind of did. I think growing up in the 80s and maybe 90s, for those of us going into the workforce in the 90s, the attitude was, well, of course, this is how things are going to be. And you kind of just laugh it off or brush it off or stew about it privately, but you don't do anything. In Casual Observer, you make a good point, which is that you basically had to learn self-defense back in the day. Kind of, yeah. I mean, I agree with that. That's not the case now. We're not seeing that now at all. I think this generation, Gretchen, you've got kids who are just entering the workforce now. So you could speak to this much more than I can. But I mean, I know your daughter. I can't imagine her putting up with 1% of what the rest of us had to put up with for that long. And
but more importantly, it's how we raise our sons, and I'll just throw that in there because you have a son, I have a son.
Yep.
This is part of the puzzle I was just alluding to and fixing it. They form their opinions at a very young age, and getting to our young boys is essential in this fight for transparency and the way in which they look at women in the workplace and all of that too. But we, and more importantly, because men still rule the world, they run most of the Fortune 500 companies, and imagine if men at the top of those companies advocated for transparency. That's why we say it's so important to get to men. And it's why we extend the olive branch to grown, older men, because we need them. We need them to look at the world in a different way and not be scared of transparency. And I think a lot of this, Julie, like, not to be too psychological about this, but men are not, they're reared to be like the protector and the, not show your feelings and don't show your emotions and don't be open. And that's part of the problem, because when they get into power, then they do what they know instead of being more open and transparent, which is, again, why I have hope for younger generations and why you and I are teaching our young sons that transparency is actually a benefit. And being open and raising up women is actually being manly. That's how you become a man, not standing there and going power, but lifting up women.
It's so funny that you say this, because it just brought to mind when my son was maybe 2 or 3 years old. He was crying in front of my dad. My dad's, your typical 80-something-year-old Russian tough man. And my dad looked at my son and said, "Oh, no. You can't cry. Men don't cry. No, there's no crying." I went crazy, because I think that is and that's a message that I think a lot of boys throughout the years who are now men have gotten.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I am blessed to be married to a man who cries at the drop of a hat, because he's so sentimental, and he's like a commercial.
That's your dad.
Yeah. You see, yeah, like my husband sees a commercial with a dog running, like towards his owner, he starts crying. But I mean, the point is, that's what we need to teach our boys, that it's okay to be vulnerable, that it's okay to be supportive, that it's okay to speak about your feelings, that it's okay to not bottle them up, that nobody's expecting you to be a protector, other than in a family, we protect each other, right? Like, to me, like, yes, it's fine to be a protector. I protect my husband just as much as he protects me, in the sense that that's the kind of the marriage contract to me, that we're all in this together. But this whole notion that men have to be siloed off creates this horrible us versus them mentality. And I think the beauty of at least our approach at Lift Our Voices, Gretchen, because you and I both so strongly believe this, is we don't bash men. We don't think it's an us versus them thing. We don't think it's some construct where we all just, one profits at the expense of the other. We want to invite them in, and not just because they're in charge of everything right now, which they are for the most part, but because it's important for them to appreciate that women go through certain things that they don't go through, and that they need to be respectful of that, and that they need to understand that, and that we all need to support each other, kind of like a marriage contract where we're all in this together. So are we in the workplace.
Yeah, as opposed to some of the other messaging going on out there right now, which is that women should be subordinates to their husband, and women should, not work outside of the family and all that. Look, I'm a better mom because I work.
Oh, yes.
I always said that. And is it true? I'm also incredibly transparent. Is it true that when I'm working, I'm giving 100% of my time to my kids? Nope. And I'm also not giving 100% of my time to work when I'm with my kids. So it works both ways. And women should not be expected to have to do it all. Remember that in the late 80s? Like women can do it all. And then suddenly they were like, well, actually, maybe we can't. I think it's more beneficial to all of us to just say none of us can do it all. And that's why we need men to help us. So it shouldn't be the opposite. It just drives me crazy when we hear that we're going to go back in time to women only being in the home and all that. When more women than ever are graduating from college, in fact, more than men, women are on the same, starting to financially get to where they're supposed to be. Not at the tippy top, but when they first come into the workforce. And it's so much. I swear to God that our kids are better off when they have parents where they see both of them doing effective things to run the family, right? Whether that's, and if you're at home, fantastic, but I hope your husband helps too.
Well, I think that's a good point, because I'll tell you, the hardest thing in the world is being a stay-at-home mom. I really believe that. I mean, if your whole life is devoted to raising your kids, that is really, really, really tough, and running the house and all these other things. I will say it still falls on women who work to do all of that, right? Like, I still have to make dinner.
I don't.
Well, or I have to be in charge of ordering out. But I mean, it's like, it's just, my husband goes to work and he comes home, and then there's dinner, and it kind of just magically appears, right? But despite the fact that I work just as hard as he does. So I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that women still carry a lot of the load, right?
That's a whole nother discussion. But anyway, we need to wrap up because it's coming to the end of our half hour. But thank you so much for joining us. And this started on free speech, and we hope that that you see the parallels here between why it's so important to argue for free speech and the work that we're doing to make sure that people have their voice in the workplace. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you again soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.